All right, race fans, we are live. We are back for 2025. It's been a long wait. We're here to answer your questions today about strategy and your fantasy lineups ahead of the first race of the season. Albert Park is back where it belongs at the start of the calendar. There's going to be weather this weekend. There's 6 new drivers on the grid, and we have no data to go off of except for 2 practice sessions so far. So we have a lot to discuss on the show today. We're happy you're with us. Start getting in your questions because we typically answer them in the order that we come in. Today, we are focusing on mostly going to be talking about strategy, who we think is underpriced going to the first race of the season. We will make time, if possible, to answer questions from new players if you have them about gameplay, but we're mostly going to try and stay on target or on point and target with specifically with strategy questions. Before we get into it, some quick intros. My name is Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of GridRival. With me today, I have Michael Ursinoli, our CTO, Ryan Booth, our Director of Business Operations, and William Laddie, our Principal Software Engineer. Before we get going, also just a reminder to like and subscribe to the channel. You may sometimes miss the push notifications and things that we send out about these shows, but as long as you're subscribed on YouTube, you should always get notified. With that, let's get into it quickly. There's, typically on these shows, we start by talking about who went up, who went down in value. We don't have that, right? Because all we've seen so far is testing. We've seen 2 practice sessions, and I think we kind of all know from watching this sport for years and years, there's kind of some sandbagging that goes on, in the first sessions of the year. So we have plenty to discuss. We've each put lineups together, I think mostly. As a reminder, everything we're going to talk about, just so you know, subject to a third practice session that hasn't happened yet. So if we tell you, here's what we're putting in our lineups, and you take that advice, just know that, that's a disclaimer you should consider. But we should get right into it and talk about, I think most important is going to be who we think is underpriced out the gate. What I thought was interesting, I mean, one of the first things I started to look at was the rookies, right? Because I think amongst the rookie group, in the beginning of the season on the GridRival game, you see the most fluctuation you're ever going to see during the whole season in terms of salary, right? That's because it's impossible to price these drivers perfectly because every season cars come with modifications. They're faster, slower than the end of last year. Drivers switch teams. There's new drivers. It's really impossible to price these people. And so what results is you usually always have a group of, I don't know, 2 drivers, 3 drivers that are really underpriced or really overpriced. But in a year where you have 6 new drivers and some team swaps, it presents a lot of opportunity for finding value on the grid. And so out the gate, just after just first practice sessions, I will say, I feel like, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, I'm obviously not the expert on this call based off of our league results for last year. I feel like we got the top of the grid pretty accurate out the gate based off of, again, FP1 and FP2. There's plenty to look forward to, but what do you guys think just out the gate as far as pricing of the top, let's call them the blue chip drivers?
Yeah, I think they're pretty close. I think the top 3, especially considering the potential weather, are all podium contenders. So Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc all look good. Piastri was looking good. Hamilton, little shaky, but we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, I'm liking Leclerc and Norris at the top right now.
William, Ryan, any thoughts?
Top 5, I feel good about. Mercedes, I think, is a bit of a question mark pace-wise.
Very much.
Russell 7th and then 10th. The 2 rookies, rookie Lawson and Antonelli didn't really impress yesterday. So I wonder if maybe they're a bit expensive for this first weekend of the year.
I
think
believe
they
so.
might perform at this level as we get into the year, but maybe a bit soon. I think the real question is whether Racing Bulls are for real. They both impressed yesterday, Sonoda and Hadjar.
Very much.
If they're for real, then I don't like the Mercedes prices so much. I don't like Alonso so much.
Yeah.
If maybe they fade, kind of like they did after testing last year, then I like those prices better for Mercedes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at right now, based on what we've seen, Lawson and Antonelli are stayaways for me. I do think they're going to age into what their original price is. Eventually, water will find its level. I mean, race number one, first time on track. It's going to rain on Sunday. Probably the young guys are not where I'm looking at, especially to spend a lot of money on for week one. I do think that they will eventually get back up to these prices, but I think for week one, they're probably a stay away. Um, yeah, and I guess we overpriced Haas. Uh, they look like a complete disaster. I think Ocon might be the worst decision you could make on your roster right now. If you have him on there, I would probably get rid of it. Behrman, I mean, the Haas doesn't look good. Behrman crashed in the first session. We
Yeah,
didn't
it's
see
just
him
hard
in
to say. I mean,
FP2.
FP1, FP2 are it's just tough. It's this the first race of the season is tough. I will say, we'll probably talk about dropping. We're talking about early release fees. I feel like this could be Euro's early release fees. If Lawson has another in FP3, he's 16, 17, 15 again, and then somehow he qualifies fifth. He's going to be grabbed up heavily next week. But I think the opposite could be true if like one of these V carbs, right? A bunch of people add them to their team, and then they actually perform pretty poorly. I think that there's going to be a lot of drop early release fee recommendations next week. I will say, I think as far as my comment about pricing the top 8 correctly, maybe more of an accurate statement is I don't see a lot of value in the top 8. Like there's nobody there to me that's like, oh, this guy's way underpriced. I'm going to roster him. Where I do see that, in the rest of the grid. I don't know if you guys would agree with that or not.
I'd push back a little bit. I think Piastri has more sudden upside than the 24.4 million he's currently priced at. The most a driver could move in a single weekend is 2 million. If he's a podium contender, that will likely result in him being a top 4-5 point scorer in fantasy points. So that could net somewhere like a $1.2 million price increase on Piastri from one race if he's able to deliver in the rain. So I would say that's the only standout for me where I'm like, okay, there's real money. There could be real money on the table with Piastri. Leclerc, there's upside, but the upside's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not in the millions at the current pricing.
You guys have anything you want to add there? So let's go then to the bottom of the grid, where there's, I think, a lot more to talk about. The obvious standout, based off of FP1 and FP2 only, I'm going to keep saying that. Isaac Hadjar. I mean, what do we? How he's priced at 16th, 9 million. FP1 9th, FP2 6th. So to William's comment, if that's real, he's a 5-race contract for me, and V-Carb's my constructor out the gate. If I would say if FP3, if he has another FP3 like that, I think FP3 you see the closest thing you're going to see to qualifying pace. I think there's probably still some sandbagging coming into the first race of the year in FP3, but if that's real, then I think a lot of it's going to come down to, obviously he's fast, but racing is different than qualifying and setting hot laps, right? And so if he can stay in the mix and not, DNF and stuff like that, he could be a hot buy out the gate.
Yeah, I'm looking at especially Hadjar being cheap and some of these cheap guys who I am high on. I am looking at long contracts. I think it's asymmetric risk. If they do really well, they're going to gain a ton of value, and I want them on my team to gain as much value as possible. If they end up horrible, I will just drop them, and it's not great to pay a release fee, but it's not like you're paying a release fee on max at 30 million. If you're paying 3% off of an $8-9 million contract, so those are the guys that I'm definitely looking to roster for a long period of time because there's so much upside, and the downside is, I mean, there's still downside, but it's minimal in comparison.
Completely agree. Hadjar was being very aggressive yesterday on track. I mean, he was even bullying McLaren's at some point in the practice. So, but the only con going against Hadjar is the wild card of a dry quali wet race. That is going to introduce a level of chaos to the mid pack, right? Because when everyone hits turn one, the braking zone compresses in the middle. And that's where the action happens. So if he's right there in the middle, 10th to 15th, there's a rookie in the rain that could go poorly. But I completely agree that if you're going Hadjar, I wouldn't go one race contract. I would look at like 3-4 to carry you through, because even if he does have a DNF or something, an underperformance, I think we're definitely seeing some potential there, which would indicate that there's some future value there to have.
I'm gonna risk it. I'm going 5 races on him only because if again, caveat, if FP3 is similar to FP1 and 2 for him, because here's the deal, he's not that much to cut if it's a wrong decision. The driver's at the bottom of the grid. He's only 9 million. If he does poor, he's going to drop, and the release fee is 3%. And so I'm more willing to risk like going long on him if we see a similar FP3. Let's move on. Let's talk about the stroller coaster. If you're new to the show and you've never ridden on the stroller coaster, we're referring to Lance Stroll's salary throughout the season. And 10th and 9th, FP1 and F2. He's ranked 18th on the app for 6.2 million. Here's the deal. If you're going to ride the stroller coaster, you got to get on at the bottom. And we got a new hat. Ryan has switched hat. If you're going to get on the stroller coaster, you need to get on at the bottom. And again, watch FP3, but if he finishes FP3 in 15th or better,
First.
yeah, first. 15th or better, I think Lance Stroll, it's hard to say this out loud, is a strong buy. Any takes? Ryan, you're obviously in. You're all in. Ryan is the former president, just so everybody knows, of the Logan Sargent fan club, which is obviously not defunct. So I think he's making his official switch.
Well, first, the fan club is not defunct. We're in waiting. We're in a circling
hiatus.
pattern right now. Yes. Like we're still eagerly awaiting his return to racing. I'm sure it's coming. He's one of the best drivers of all time. But yeah, I think moving over to Lance Stroll is a pretty natural switch. They have the same initials. I have a Lance Stroll hat that I got from sitting in the Lance Stroll grandstand, so I've always felt a connection to him. And I think, not to get too into the political climate, but Canada's basically about to become a state, so he's kind of another American racer. But in all seriousness, I love him at this price. He's
Dude,
Lance
it's hard
Stroll.
to beat it. I mean, yeah.
God help me, I have him for 5 races right now.
Okay. Well, you guys are kind of all on my bandwagon then. But yeah, I thought I was going to be unique, being like, I've got my Lance Stroll hat, I'm ready to go. But it sounds like everyone loves him. But yeah, I think at this price, and I know he's Lance Stroll, but he does have experience, so like that can help in the rain. And I just think he has nowhere to go but up. The Aston Martin did not look as bad as I had expected it to. And compared to Alonso, he's just a much better contract. So
If it becomes necessary to rejoin a wet track on Sunday, will he drive on the pavement, or will he turn his car towards the gravel?
Directly into the gravel.
that's all part of the ride. You never know what you're going to get from Lance Stroll. You just got to play the value.
It's a stroller coaster, for sure. But the thing you got to look at is where's Fernando finishing, right? 8 and 13. I mean, that at least gives you some idea of the price gap of two guys in the same car. And Lance, I don't think last year he was ever within, I don't know, I just a wild guess, 4 positions of Alonso. But I mean, they're 8 apart or 9 apart. Are they 8 apart? They're 9 apart. Sorry, 7.
7.
Which is a big gap. I think the biggest separation of 2 drivers on the same team I've ever seen on the app is 10. So they're up there. I think I do think 18th at 6.2 for him is a buy, but What's tough is there's a lot of good stuff down there. Hulkenberg at 7.6. I mean, he had his FP1 was 18th, but FP2 is 8th. And I think honestly, one of my opinions is Nico Hulkenberg is one of the most undervalued drivers on the grid, just in terms of like fan sentiment and how he's paid and who's trying to sweep him up for a contract. I get that he's older and he's
Counterpoint.
probably aging out of the sport, but like what he did last year in a Haas, his consistency, I mean, regularly finishing
In a Haas being the key.
Yeah, he was
Correct.
driving a Haas. Now he's driving a Sauber.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know, but he's still. That's my point. Is like he put a Sauber in 8th in FP2. And lots. I mean, I gonna keep saying the disclaimer. Right? I get it's free practice. It's the first one of the season, but I'm just saying if he does it again today in FP3, he's for sure an underpriced category contender. And honestly, the bottom. I don't know about Bortoletto. I don't think any of us are going to be bring up him at the top
He's
of the list.
faster than Haas.
I do have a counterpoint to this.
Okay.
So Stroll's one lap quali pace, he can pull it off. It's going to be a dry quali. So what I think is going to happen is Stroll is going to out qualify his current rank of 18th. I think he's going to pull that off. Then he's going to be in the mid, in the mid pack, and then he is going to crash and take out many drivers with him. And then Jack Doohan is just going to bob and weave through the debris field.
He might just spy 98 that thing on the start. Who knows? It just like collects 15 cars or something. So I think though this rain brings up another question, especially with these back markers. What do they do with the setup? So for those who don't know the F1 rules in a lot of depth, there's this thing called Park for May. Once qualifying starts, there you can adjust almost nothing on the car until for the rest of the weekend actually. So most of your setup decisions have to get made before qualifying, and you can't change them based on dry or wet. So I think some of these teams might say, well, it's going to rain on Sunday. Let's just forget qualifying, put the best wet weather setup we can on the car, and try and make up some positions that way. And if you're Haas, you have nothing to lose. You're already last. If you're Sauber, you're pretty much always last. You have nothing to lose. So I think it adds some intrigue going into this weekend. Or they might be the contrarian. Maybe everybody thinks it's going to rain and say, you know what? It's going to be sunshine like at whatever hour they race on Sunday. And like we're going to make the spots up that way.
I think we need to quickly address talent options. Lots of questions with stars in them. And then we need to get to Q&A. Then I think we should review lineups briefly and then get to Q&A. There's a lot of questions coming in. I'm liking Sainz for talent driver.
You don't say.
Second in FP1. 11th, not great in FP2. Again, I'm going to watch FP3 and see where he lands. But if he lands anywhere in between those two, I feel like I like him and he's pissed. He's got something to prove.
I feel like those FP1 times were him and Albon doing quali runs when a lot of people weren't.
Maybe.
Especially when Behrman wrecking the car disrupted the session.
Mm-hmm. If that is the case, then I would probably revert to Yuki as highest price. And again, if we see similar things from VCarb in F1 in 1 and 2 as we do in 3, then I'm probably making the switch.
So with where they're priced right now, and when we get into lineups, you could have Sainz and Yuki on the same lineup right now. And that is a move I would highly consider heading into lockdown, especially if for talent driver flexibility, right? I think those are two great options right now at the top of the field. And even if I don't have one of them as my talent driver, I kind of want both of them on my team right now. So that's what I'm playing on talent driver selection between Sainz and Yuki, but I'm specifically looking at having them both on the team at the same time with different contract lengths. So they roll off at different times. So I still have one while I lose the other.
Interesting. William, you say something?
Yeah. So right now I'm carrying Hadjar, Stroll, and Sainz on my lineup. Those are my talent eligible drivers. Right now I'm on Hadjar. I'll tell you why. So
Really?
Hadjar was up there with Sonoda in terms of pace. And if we look at where they're ranked in terms of improvement index, Sonoda, if I'm not mistaken, is ninth, and Hajar is 16th. So if he can just keep pace with Sonoda, he's going to gain a lot more improvement points because 16th to 10th is a lot better than like 11th to 9th or whatever I said Sonoda was.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's more upside there. Plus, you gain the $2 million and all, or £2 million and all that.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I'm assuming you're hoping for a lot of improvement, overtake, all the things that an
yeah,
underpriced driver is going to capture that
absolutely.
Gasly might
So
not.
like I could argue for Stroll talent driver right now. I like Hadjar better. The only reason I don't have Sonoda is because I'm basically giving away my lineup. I have Hadjar and I have Racing Bulls. I don't want
Mm,
that much exposure, like in case things go sideways for Racing
yeah,
Bulls on Sunday.
that makes sense.
I feel like William and I have like the same, because I also have Signs, Hedjar, Stroll. And I think the only Signs makes so much sense as talent driver on almost every level, besides everyone is using him. That I think is,
It's early in
do
the
I
season,
want,
though. It's early
yeah, but
in the
it's like,
season.
yeah, but if Signs does go out there and blows everybody away and kind of does what we've seen in testing and maybe in FP1, who knows how indicative those times are. But if he does do that, and you don't have him talent driver and everybody else does, you lose some serious ground.
All right, let's get into our lineups. I'll start. I have two heavy hitters at the top who I probably know will not get me tons of value, but as a reminder to everybody, next weekend is a sprint race. And in sprint races, constructors earn you no extra points, but drivers can earn you extra points. So I'm kind of thinking ahead. So for two race contracts, I have Norris and Leclerc at the top. Might swap for Piastri, and I have a little more money to spend at the bottom. I have Sainz as talent driver currently for two races, only because I just want to see what's going to happen. I don't know that I can commit for longer than that, and I also don't like one race contracts. I have Hadjar and Hulkenberg right now, both for 5 races. So, taking a little risk there on how underpriced I think they are. Again, I will be looking at, I know it's hard to say out loud, Lance Stroll, to see what his FP3 performance is like. And then I have Racing Bulls as a constructor, 2 contracts, because again, after sprint race in China, I want options. So I have several contracts scheduled to drop off after that next event to leave me some open positions to try and move some things around. Mike, you want to go next?
Yeah. So on my team, my caveat is I'm gonna have an edit because, as William said, right now I have a lot of exposure to Racing Bulls, but at the top, and a little bit about lineup structure, right? You always want to try and have a podium contender on your team. So for me, that's Leclerc. I think that's a solid choice for a podium contender. Second to that, I have Piastri, also potentially a podium contender, which would be great for my lineup. But I am not going Leclerc Norris. For me, it's just too top heavy at this early in the season to gain value. I think Leclerc has a chance to be flat to slightly positive. Piastri, I think, has $1 to $1.5 million of upside. Then I go to my Sainz Sonoda pairing. So Sainz Sonoda, I'm not exactly sure which one I'm going for talent driver yet. I might make a change out of Sonoda. We'll see. We'll see what FP3 does. But Sainz is a push in my mind. So 65% of players have have Sainz on their lineup. So if you don't have Sainz on your lineup, there's a good you want to match some if you want to play it safe, you want to have Sainz on your lineup to be able to match points that other players in your league have. If you want to do a contrarian play, don't have Sainz on your lineup at all, because you will beat other people who do if Sainz doesn't perform. And then further down my list, we have Doohan and Racing Bulls. I don't like the exposure I have with Racing Bulls right now, so I might make some edits there. But I'm going Doohan at the bottom of the lineup just on the mid-pack crash theory. I think he's going to quality towards the back, and I think he'll move up some positions, not many, just by staying on track. We'll see. But that's where I'm at with my lineup.
Mr. Booth.
So I did go top heavy. I did go Norris, Leclerc. I think those are the two most likely race winners. I think those are going to be the two guys that score the most points up top. I know Piastri is a value play, but I went with Norris over him because I'm structuring my lineup to try and maximize value at the lower positions. Then it goes down into signs. I just feel like I can't not run him at this point. I feel like there is a lot of upside there. Like he's one of the mid pack guys who can legitimately challenge for a top 6 spot. I don't know if he'll get there, but he has the potential to, I think, from everything we've seen. And then down into Hadjar, Stroll, and I'm running Williams right now. I'm between Williams and V Carb. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do there yet, but and just for the hell of it, I might just make Lance Stroll the talent driver to be a little different and have a little fun and back up my takes.
For the memes, got to do it.
All right. We're 25 minutes in. Let's get to
My
Q&A.
lineup,
There's a lot.
I got a lineup too.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, so I gave a lot of it away. I do up top. I have Norris and Leclerc, so those guys are potential race winners, and I definitely want them for the sprint weekend in China next week. I have Norris for 4, Leclerc for 2. There's a reason I go 4 and not 5 with Norris. That's because round 6 is a sprint. Miami is round 6. That's a sprint, and so I'm going to want to have Norris available for that. So that's my top, and then I've got signs for 2 races that I've got him right now. I think 2 races is enough to get him to around the talent line, which is I think the ceiling for signs. Then Hadjar for 5 races and Stroll for 5 races. God help me. Um, I think they both have a lot of runway to gain value legitimately, and then Racing Bulls for 3 races. Same idea there. I think 2 to 3 races is about enough time for them to gain the value that they're going to gain. Uh, I did consider Alpine. I saw some Alpine talk in the chat. Remember Brazil last year? They did double podium in a wet race. Um, I think on pace, though, they're probably about the 8th fastest constructor ahead of Sauber and Haas. So the ceiling's not quite as high on pace. I think part of Brazil was also lucky timing with a red flag and a decision to not take tires before. So those are my thoughts, like who I took and who my runners up were. Right now, I have Hadjar as talent driver on my team, and we'll see how much second guessing I do after practice tonight.
We have the same 5 drivers as of now.
Boring.
All right. Let's get into Q&A. I started copying some questions down. We are not going to get to all of them today. There's a lot of people here. I think probably this is our biggest show to date. Let's see. Does Behrman's wreck affect anything? No, not in our game per se, if that's what the question is. I don't know if that's the exact question, but doesn't affect, there's no points for practice in our game. It obviously might affect what you decide to do rostering him, but again, I pay close attention to FP3 and see how he does, since we didn't get to miss him or didn't get to see a full performance from him. Yes, William.
Apparently, they had to change the power unit, like as part of the repairs they made after
changed
that crash.
everything.
So if that first power unit is gone, then you can expect him to take a penalty later in the season, but
Yeah.
earlier than everyone else.
Yeah, that's a
Something
great
to
point.
keep in mind.
Let's see. William asked, what happens if something happens between lockout and the start of the race to cause a driver to miss the race? That would depend. And William, I'll have you answer, William.
Sure.
That would
So
two scenarios, right?
If something happens, yeah. So we'll address his question first, which is what happens if something happens between lockdown and the start of the race. So like maybe the driver's sick or something and they can't race. So if they get replaced, then we substitute their replacement driver in. And like if you had Max and Max is sick one day, then whoever takes his place, I think it would probably be Ayumu Iwasa. It would be just like Max. We'd pretend that he's Max for that day. Um, if the car doesn't run at all, then you get 0 points for the race for that driver. And like that's a thing that's happened a few times. Usually somebody has a hard crash in qualifying and they're ruled out of the race is when that would happen. So that's what happens in your scenario. if a driver got fired, like the rumor mill already wants to replace Doohan with Colapinto, then we would terminate your Doohan contract. You get the money back, and we'd come up with a price and a rank for the replacement driver, and then you'd be free to sign them or anyone else if you'd like, subject to the cool down rule. Um, Hopefully that answers your question.
Next question from Heyon Plays, who has asked it 3 times in 3 different ways. Essentially, is wondering when in the season do you really start thinking about points over value and how to balance those two? And that's a really good strategic question with this game. And typically, we see to really oversimplify the answer halfway, if you're looking for the simplest answer as possible. In reality, in my experience with this contracts game and specifically with F1, the answer is very different for the IndyCar League game and the NASCAR League game. Typically, what I see is when people get their team values close to or above 130 million, that is like usually a sign where you're kind of you tend to be safe from the downside of dropping back. So there was a year where I think it was 2 years ago, I got in one of my leagues, I had my team value go all the way up to 127. It was up there, but it's still over a course of several races, it dropped all the way back down to like 112. But what we see is there's kind of this threshold, and it's around 130. So say give or take 5, depending on the circumstance in your team, where it gets much more difficult to lose value because you can pick a strong enough team that they're just less likely to DNF, to do all those different things, and so you have a little bit more protection. And when that threshold is crossed strategically is when we usually recommend people start thinking about focusing mostly or even exclusively on accumulating as many fantasy points as you can versus balancing points and dollars. The inverse of that is at the beginning of the season, as I said earlier in the call, is going to be the absolute biggest opportunity to get value out the gate. And you're going to see it happen. I mean, if you look at the global leaderboard, there's probably going to be something like 100,000 people playing. And there's enough permutations of possible different lineups that you will probably see, I don't know, 10 people who they happen to have a lineup that has, every driver goes up the maximum amount. And sometimes we see out the gate people's team value go up 11 or 12 million. Now, it's important to remember you don't get to keep that value unless those drivers are also released at that moment. So if you sign Lance Stroll at the bottom of the stroller coaster at what's he at 6.2 or something, let's say you sign him for 2 races and he goes up 2 million each race, so he's at 10.2. Or sorry, let's say you sign him up 3 races, right? And after 2 he's up 10.2. You don't get that money. You have to release him after the next race, and whatever the value gap is between what you signed him for and what he's released at is what you actually get back. So I don't know. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that? I think that covers most of it.
That covers a lot.
Yeah, and at this point, you can almost play the game in 5 race chunks because that's the longest contract. You're not going to start crossing that threshold within the first 5 races, so it's something that I wouldn't even bother worrying about at this point. We will cover this. We have a show before every single race, so we'll start covering when we're starting to think about doing that, but it's not even really on the horizon yet, so I wouldn't even worry about it.
For me, I tend to think of it in terms of breaking the season into thirds. I think the salaries ends up stabilizing usually around like Imola, Monaco. It's like round 7, round 8. When I say stabilizing, I mean reflective of the pace usually. You'll still have bargains all season based on somebody had a bad day, they lost 2 million. Let's snatch them to grab a quick couple million. So that's the first third of the season. I'm thinking a lot about the bargains because that's when you're going to have the most of them.
Mm-hmm.
That second third of the season, I'm thinking a lot more about points, but I'm still opportunistically grabbing bargains. And then the last third of the season, which I would define as when they're done with Europe, so like after Monza, like when they get to Singapore, that's when I'm thinking about points and like almost exclusively points, unless I have a golden opportunity like Norris had 2 bad races, I can snatch him up, something like that.
Specific contract length question. Do you guys like to lock up a high value driver long term for example, Norris, Leclerc, and keep midfield drivers loose race to race, those that hover around 18 million.
I would say
I was gonna say it's different this year. I think back when Max was kind of he's gonna win every single race unless something weird happens, and I was like, all right, 5 races, he's gonna be at the top every single time. This year, there are more questions at the top when you look at both the Ferraris, both the McLarens. You look at Max. I feel like it's going to differ on a week in, week out basis. So that's not really something we're trying to do this year, but I have done it in the past. So it really all just depends on how you see the grid.
I don't see anyone as a 5-race contract right now at the start of the season. I think that's far too inflexible to be able to read and react to what's happening on track week to week as we go through. Especially next China, there's extra points available for China. I want to have maximum flexibility, so I'm going short contract lengths. 1, 2, 3 is my top at the start of the season, especially this year.
If I'm locking somebody up for a long time, it's either somebody who's like underpriced by potentially 10 million, like Stroll, like not quite Hadjar, or it's somebody like a Norris or a Leclerc who I can count on to be on the podium basically every race. And it's like I would never want to bail on them for some reason. And even then I'm taking 4 races just because I want him for the sprint, which is round 6.
Mm-hmm. Couple questions that I've seen about it gives variations of is it good / okay / normal to have money remaining in your bank with a full lineup? The answer is yes. Again, much more so at the beginning of the season. If there's a lot of drivers that are way underpriced, uh, and the whole goal out the gate is to focus most on value, for sure. There was a point last season where I think I had like $12 million in the bank going into a race. Now that's not normal. At the beginning of the year, if you're getting if you have more than 10, I'd say, and these guys might have a different number specifically, but somewhere in that range, you're probably starting to sacrifice points too much, especially with the sprint race next weekend. So definitely okay, definitely normal, and early on recommended.
I have 4 million in my bank right now. Apparently Ryan does as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, right
Oh,
now
I have 1.2. I have Williams over V.
Okay,
So.
you have less than me.
Yeah,
Mhm.
1.2 is going to be the most common leftover amount in most players' banks, regardless of the combinations. Just how the maths. So most people are going to have 1.2 left over. But I
Mhm.
would say if you're going to have a lot left over, run a second lineup, join another league. Like if you're going to go and have 10 million left in your bank, don't make that your only league you're going to play this season. Go
Yep.
go enter into another public league and put a conservative lineup together, just in case you get wrecked on the first race. You don't want that to be a season ender for you.
Yep. I'm going to fast forward a little bit out of sequence because there was a good question that came through, and then I'll come back to some of these other ones. But someone had asked, as a first-time GridRival player coming from the official fantasy F1 app, what tips would help given the gameplay difference? Really, really great question. And I think there's a lot of things that we could say about just the differences in the game. I think a lot of them are related to user experience and user interface and just a lot more features and functionality. But I think when you're talking specifically about the gameplay strategic different, the biggest difference is going to be our contracts functionality in the game. And associated with that is that in our game, driver salaries have the opportunity to move up and down a lot quicker than Formula One's own game. So earning value is a much bigger part of this product than F1's game. It's really important, a lot more important, I would say, to focus on where you see value in the grid in this game than it is in the traditional fantasy game. That's the biggest thing to me. I don't know if you guys would have anything you want to add there. I also just pay attention to there's most certainly points different. I don't have F1's game point schema memorized. I think that my gut is that we probably still spread points out a little bit more, or leaned less towards race finish position than the F1 game. So we obviously want it to correlate strongly, right? The point of racing a car is to finish first place, but also if you look at other sports where fantasy sports has done really really well, it's not just picking the team that you think is going to win, right? It's too one dimensional if the game works like that. And so in our game in Formula One, there's 6 different ways that drivers earn points, and so I guess 7 on sprint weekends. And some of those ways I think are a little bit more weighted towards than in. I know that F1 game has stuff beyond just race finish position, but I think the weight on GridRival tends to be a little bit larger towards stuff like overtakes, beating your teammate, improvement points, things like that.
Yeah, go to our YouTube page. We did 2 shows this week, both about an hour long, going through basically general gameplay strategy and what to expect from the game. So I highly recommend watching those back.
Yeah, and this was a question from John O'Connell. And John, if you're still on the stream, therace.com or the-race.com, which is a big media outlet that follows a sport that a lot of us are probably familiar with. I think they just published an article on the differences between the F1 game and GridRival, so that might be something to check out as well. Okay, somebody had asked, what are we thinking about contract lengths? It's a vague question, but I think this is something we talk about. We talked a lot about this on our new player show. And so we have a lot of different opinions on contract lengths, but I think like there's kind of 3 things that we're always looking at. I don't want to say there's only 3, but there's 3 core things. I'll say the one that I look at most, personally, and probably the one I only look at the most. And just for context, there's some other question about like who's the best on the show and who finished the highest. I'm the worst to listen to. So just to throw that out there, even though I invented the game and actually created the game mechanics, I just I don't have as much time to pay as much attention to it as I used to. But the thing that I personally look at is I really just look at how undervalued I think the driver is and how long I think it's going to take them to get back to where where I think they'll settle or where their plateau is going to be. Let's throw out Lance Stroll, for example. If for some reason I think that he's at 6.2 right now, if I think that he's capable of getting 12, I'm going to think, how long is it going to take him to get to 12? It'll take him all 5 races, most likely. But that's the one thing I look at. The other kind of 2 things, one of them is what are the next races on the grid, right? And how is that driver likely to perform on those? Now, if you're playing our NASCAR IndyCar game, this becomes way more of a big deal, right? Because you have so many different types of races. In IndyCar, you have drivers that are really good on oval courses, but not as good on road courses. And so in that game, you really have to think a lot more strategically about what events are coming up on the remainder of that contract. Last one is what's the last one?
I mean,
we got types of race. We got how undervalued
and options. Like
options. That's right. You want to leave your options open. So if you go look at your My Team screen right now, and all 6 of your positions, your 5 drivers and constructor, are all signed for 3 races, don't do that. And the reason why is because from weekend to weekend, the best case scenario is you can play with your lineup, right? Ideally, you'll have a position or 2 open every weekend. And so to do that, you need to think about your contract lengths. I mentioned that earlier. I signed several for 2 races because I want to have them there for the sprint race, and then I want to have some of my options open. The first race, Australia, might be one of the times where we'd say, it's probably okay. Most of us don't like 1 race contracts, and just me personally, I'm not gonna sign a 1 race contract to my team just to solve for this specific problem, leaving my options open. But as far as in the second race of the season, I'll start to have more optionality. So those are kind of how the 3 big things that we encourage people to think about in terms of contract length. Next, there was a comment here by Stefan Mason. It said 100 million doesn't go that far at the start. And I would actually push back on that based off what we said earlier. I think 100 million goes the farthest at the start of the season because there's most likely to be value on the board. Once you get towards summer break, all these drivers are going to settle out, and it's pretty rare. We have seen it over the last 2 seasons once or twice. Like last year it happened with McLaren, right? Where kind of out the gate, they weren't that fast, but then they really started to accelerate. That usually doesn't happen in that later half of the season in a significant enough way that there's tons and tons of value on the board at summer break time. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, so I think the other big example last year was Mercedes. Their car was not good, and then you get towards the summer, they were able to podium, they were able to win races. I think this year's going to be different because it is a lame duck year for the rules package. So there's going to be significant regulation changes for next year in F1. Like there will essentially be different cars. The MGUH won't be a thing anymore. So one of the things that will be interesting to see as the season goes on, who decides to continue developing the 2025 car that's going to be essentially throwaway work long term, and who's going to just say, forget 25, let's focus on 26. And it's like if you have trouble early, or even if you just decide, the money's better spent next year, that cost cap being a thing, like maybe like a Haas or a Sauber decides, let's just run at the back this year and let's come out strong in 26. If you see a team that looks to be punting on 25, everyone behind them suddenly becomes underpriced as they get past.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have teams that might get suckered into a title fight or thinking they have a chance at the title. It could be a three-way battle this year: Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and like we'll see who pushes harder than others.
I'm just gonna say I love one race contracts. I use one race contracts all the time.
Yeah, I do too. If you want to run one race contract, Sonoda. That's my opinion. So if Sonoda actually does well, he's no longer talent eligible. He'll go above 18 million. Sonoda's a guy that I really like as a talent driver. I'm less excited about him or any Racing Bulls driver if they're not talent eligible.
A couple good questions again about gameplay. This is a super important one, and we're running out of time, so we're not gonna expand on this a lot. What about only picking 4 drivers? Not a good strategy. Money to be made on cheap drivers. No, don't do it. No. So to be able to select a talent driver on this game, you have to have a full roster. And a talent driver is basically like having a 7th driver. So the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to have 5 drivers that are priced high and likely to earn more points and probably not get you much value, or do you want to have 7 drivers? You're always going to be better off. The strategy of not using a talent driver and only sending 5 drivers never works. So that's our quick answer.
Yep.
Another great question regarding gameplay, going to be a great answer for new players. If you haven't played the game before, can we re-sign a driver once the contract is over? You cannot. You have to wait one race. We have a thing called a one race rule where you have to let them cool down for one event. The whole point of that is like if you sign a contract and you release it and then you can just re-sign them again, there'd be really no point in the contract to begin with. And so as soon as a driver drops off your race, you can't use them again for a single event. Another reason why you shouldn't sign all the same like contracts, right? If you have 6 drivers or 5 drivers and a constructor all drop off your team at the same time, you can't use 6. That's basically a quarter of the grid you can't use for the next event. Do you suggest signing one race contracts for people who might not be the best option, but are a good option because of the rain this weekend? Mike says yes.
Yes,
100%.
Mike won our league last year, right? Didn't you?
I won many leagues last year.
There you go. He's also he also
I was the best in the leagues.
He's also the CTO, so he's also the most likely to have gone into the database and entered some numbers manually. But
William keeps us all honest. I say it every
I don't
time.
think he did.
William's in on it.
The one race contract is it is a power move to pull. Like it's a tool in the toolkit that you've got to take out. So I think for me personally as a player, it's crazy right now to not have a one race contract for Australia. It's going to rain. People are going to crash. There's going to be maximum value drops for certain players, for certain drivers. And China is a sprint weekend that offers you more points. One race contracts, in my opinion, are a move right now. I don't have 5, but it wouldn't be strange for me. Right now I have 2 and I'm considering 3 one race contracts. So I could maximize on the movement that's going to happen both inside of Australia and coming into China.
Dade Murphy, what do you think of Lance Stroll? His value super low, so lots of upside, but is it Stroll? Dade, obviously you're late to the show. We talked about Stroll, and there's a lot of a lot of comments about him. I think one was objectively, if he's the best underpriced driver, I'm still not going to sign him.
I mean, I feel right at home after starting the Logan Sargent fan club. The entire chat was roasting me, and it's happening again with Stroll. I've seen some pretty negative Stroll comments, but it'll make it all that much sweeter when he puts it on the podium this weekend.
I think you're asking for it. Joshua says, "Are there any plans to bring MotoGP back to GridRival next year?" I can't say that there's plans definitively. We haven't decided against it. It's just a matter of how much effort we can put into bringing that audience to our app. In reality, we already have 3 sports. We're now the official fantasy app of IndyCar, and so we'd love to have MotoGP back on the game. But to be honest, we launched it, I think, a little bit early the first time, and there just was not the opportunity to capture as many users that we want. But we get asked that. I feel like we've heard that quite a few times on these shows so far. People have been asking about MotoGP, or I hear it in like Instagram comments and stuff like that. So we know that there's people looking for something a little bit deeper than what the official game has, but no decisions as of today. Alex said the punishment for long-term contracts is pretty light if you're looking for that flexibility. It depends on this driver price, right? Unless I'm missing his question. I mean, the punishment is directly correlated to the price of driver. So I think if in the situation I gave earlier, Lance Stroll, for example, if you sign him for 5-race contract and after the Australian Grand Prix, you realize it's the worst decision you ever made, he would not be that expensive to release from your team. Max Verstappen would be very expensive to release from your team.
But also cheap to release from your team because the release fee is less than the maximum drop. So if you think that the driver you have on your roster is going to have the maximum drop of 2 million, or even worse, the team, which is maximum drop of 3 million, then yes, I'm paying the drop fee every single time because it's literally saving me money on my contracts.
Yeah. Dade asked a good question. Should we triple up on Williams? I think a better discussion point, because the reality is we need to see FP3, but might be worth discussing when, if ever, do you guys triple up on a team and expose yourself to that much single team risk?
Right now is a good time. Right now,
really,
it is taking on risk. That's the thing. If you have a driver and their constructor, and that driver has a bad day, you're taking it both ways. Like you're essentially down a driver and a half rather than one driver, or 2.5 if he's your talent driver. Like Sainz is going to be a popular choice if we're discussing Williams. So it's added risk. It's also added ceiling. Like imagine you had loaded up on Alpine for Brazil last year and they double podiums. Like suddenly you're a genius. The other thing I would say is that one of your drivers will score teammate points, the other one will not.
mm-hmm.
And hopefully they're not scoring a lot of teammate points because that means the teammate had a bad day. So you're a little bit constrained that way. I have 5 different teams represented on my lineup right now with my drivers. Like we discussed earlier, Sonoda, Hadjar, Racing Bulls is a thing you could do, but especially in a wet race, there is risk.
Let's see. Any on one race contracts to pick up, or what thoughts on one race contracts to pick up DNFs from the race in Australia? I'm not sure if follow that question. Do you guys?
That's a good idea. If there's going to be a lot of DNF, he's basically saying, I'm going to leave a roster spot open for next week to just snag whoever crashes this week. I think
Piastri crashes, he loses 2 million. Piastri 100% next week.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. There's one race contracts.
Yeah, going back to the question about differences in this game and just the importance of value. That is one thing worth noting is like it's sometimes in the game it's easier to lose value than gain it because of DNFs, right? If Piastri crashes, he will immediately lose the full amount, which is 2 million. But even if he finishes the next race where he was originally ranked, he will not likely go up 2 million immediately. He will have to earn it back a little bit. So that is something to consider. Do sprint races count for the one race rule cooldown?
So the cooldown rule applies to entire weekends.
Yep.
So we have the Australia weekend. If Like if you have a one race contract, they're going to be out for the entire China weekend. If you have a two race contract, they're out for whatever's after China. I think it's Japan.
Japan.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it goes by entire weekends. The sprints are just part of the weekend, just like qualifying is part of the weekends.
5 minutes left. Any closing thoughts? Dustin Benway's here again. He wants merch. Every show,
Consistent.
every show. It's coming,
I
man.
love it.
We'll get it eventually. You'll be the first call.
Yeah, I've
Just
got
make
got
sure and
some
tell us your number.
got some thoughts. Okay, so if you found this discussion helpful and you have not watched any of our newbie videos that we already did, go watch one of those tonight before FP3 as well. Share this link within your league, within Paddock, anywhere. You know, the more people who know how to play the game well makes the game more fun and competitive across the entire ecosystem. So go ahead and do that. Subscribe to the YouTube so that you get notifications for when we do these, because we do these before every F1 race. So you'll see how right we were, how wrong we were.
You missed, or at least I didn't hear it. The most important advice we could give you is invite your friends.
Oh, right.
The stated vision of our business is to elevate the excitement of motorsports for every race fan. We created GridRival because as motorsports fans, we saw our friends doing fantasy football and March Madness and all this stuff every year, and we don't care about those sports. And so we wanted something that really brought us closer to the experience of motorsports, both from a viewer perspective, but also from a social perspective, right? A lot of race fans are not, going to like watch parties and stuff like traditional sports fans do. And so we noticed that a lot of them didn't have a place like this that could be their home for gaming and community and interaction. And so one of the things we see is the people that have the most fun on GridRival are the ones that are in a league of 5 to 10 people with their close friends, or their friends that maybe they're not super close with, but they know or love motorsports. My league that I'm the most competitive in is 11 of my friends. And so the biggest encouragement, if you want to have the most fun on this game, all the strategy stuff we just talked about is obviously important to help you win. But I think the social component of this, which is why we built League Chat, which is why we have this paddock feature in the app that we're going to continue to invest in. We do those because the heart of what we're doing is we want to make racing a more community driven sport, and we want to give you guys the added benefit of the extra engagement that can come from a product like this. So all that to say, invite your friends. If you're in a big huge league that has 1,000 people in it, great. But we'd also encourage you to start your own small one, even if there's only one other person in it. Just try it out. Try something that's a little bit more small and connected and intimate, and see how it changes your experience watching the race this year. We're super glad everybody's with us. Brian, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you don't have any friends, that's okay too. Jump in the paddock. I'll be your friend. I'll respond to your questions.
We've
We're
also
all in
got
this
our
together.
Discord.
Yeah,
We
the
do have a Discord. Yep, find us on Discord. But in closing, we're glad everybody's here. We love seeing people playing this game, people having fun with the game. We will be here ahead of every Formula One race. Our default time for these is the Tuesday before the race. We have not decided on that yet this year, but that's what it was every year. But once we decide on a time, we will be there every week or every race weekend to have a similar conversation around strategy. So thank you all for joining. Enjoy the first race of the season, and we're glad you're here. All right.